Very good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of Auditing and Assurance Standard Board of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, I welcome you all in today's 108th CP program organized by WBSB of ICPI this year. Today is the third part of the series of the webinar on CARO 2020. On first part, we have covered 5 clauses. In the last part of this webinar, we have covered 6 clauses. Now today, we are going to cover 10 clauses, rest of the 10 clauses relating to the CARO 2020. In order to tackle this particular 10 clauses, we are having with us very eminent and learned speaker, C. Astha Gupta ji. So on behalf of AASB of ICI, I extend my warm welcome to you. Namaste, ma'am, on behalf of AASB of ICI. We are having with us two moderators, CA Drishti Rana ji and CA Priyanka Agarwal ji. Welcome to you, ma'am, on this AASB platform and a webinar organized by AASB of ICI. So Honorable Chairman, sir, is stuck up in one of the meeting. Maybe he'll be joined in between. So I am taking this liberty to start this webinar. So before we start, I request Madam Priyanka Agarwal ji to please start the proceedings of the today's webinar. Over to you, Priyanka, madam, please.
Good afternoon, esteemed guests, distinguished speakers, and fellow participants. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to AASB of ICI, Chairman Sir, Dr. Sanjeev Kumar Singhal Sir, and Vice Chairman Sir, Dr. Vishal Doshi Sir, in their absence, and CA Anilji for giving me the opportunity to moderate 108 CPE session and this webinar. I would also like to extend our esteemed guest speaker, CA Astha Gupta ma'am, and all our fellow CA enthusiasts who have joined us for the exciting Day 3 webinar. Before we delve into today's discourse, let's take a moment to reflect on the enriching session of Day 1 and Day 2, where CA Sandeep Dinodia sir and CA Utsav Dogra sir meticulously shared in-depth knowledge of reporting requirement of CARO 2020 on topics on clauses, PPE, inventory, internal audit, non-cash transaction for acquisition of assets, resignation of statutory auditor, CSR reporting, investments, guarantee security, default in repayments of loans and other borrowings, compliance of section 185 and 186, acceptance of deposits, related party transactions. It's been an enlightening journey so far, and I am certain in today's discussion will further enhance our understanding and proficiency, where CA Astha Gupta ma'am would be talking on remaining clauses, which are cost records, statutory dues, undisclosed transactions, NBFC and housing finance activities, Nidhi companies, cash losses, money raised through IPO and FPO, fraud reporting, financial ratios, qualification, and adverse remarks. Now I would like to request CA Drishti Rana ma'am, our co-moderator, to introduce our guest speaker and take the session forward. Over to you, Drishti.
Thank you, Priyanka. First of all, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to WSB Chairman CA Sanjeev Singhal sir and Vice Chairman Vishal Doshi sir for organizing this webinar and giving me an opportunity to serve as a moderator. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our very esteemed and learned speaker for this webinar, CA Astha Gupta ma'am. CA Astha Gupta ma'am qualified in 2016 and is currently a partner at SK Gulati and Associates, a 35-year-old Delhi-based firm of chartered accountants. She brings professional experience in statutory audits, personal and corporate taxation, income tax assessment, GST compliances, assessments, and advisory. In the past, she was a senior consultant at EY with risk advisory team conducting internal audit, risk assessment projects in telecom sector. She was also deputed to Philippines for an engagement during her tenure there. Prior to EY, she worked as an audit executive in the in-house global internal audit team of French IT MNC for more than 2 years. Ma'am has also served in other professional roles. She was invited as a guest speaker at numerous sessions organized by WSB to deliberate on standard of auditing, and technical sessions on Indian accounting standards. She has addressed more than 2,500 chartered accountants through both online and offline modes. She was also invited as a guest speaker by Delhi Board of School Education to counsel students on chartered accountancy as a career. She has moderated and deliberated on technical topics related to GST, international taxation, wealth management, and audit. Ma'am is also an esteemed member of various organizations and committees. She is a member of Organizing Committee and joint editor of Bharatiya Vitta Salakar Samiti, a leading think tank of Indian financial professionals. She is also a joint treasurer of Lahu Udyog Bharati, an all India organization working for the benefit of micro and small enterprises, and a member of editorial advisory panel of Chartered Secretary, the official monthly journal of ICSI. Additionally, she has adjudicated elocution competition for CA students organized by Northern India Region Council of ICI and won technical paper presentations across the country in national conferences for CA students organized by Board of Studies during her student days. We look forward to an insightful session, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you, Drishti. Thank you for such a good introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is CA Astha Gupta. Before I start today's session, like everyone else, I would also like to convey my heartfelt gratitude to the Auditing and Assurance Standard Board, AASB of ICAI, for hosting such useful webinars for the benefit of the professional fraternity. It is commendable that within the short span of 3 months, they have already completed 108 webinars and seminars. So just look at the enthusiasm with which they want to, educate and update our professionals. So commendable, and hats off to the entire team of the AASB, especially to the chairman Sanjeev Singhal sir, vice chairman Vishal Doshi sir, Anil ji, who's been constantly coordinating with us and giving me all this opportunity to present offline and online mode. So I'm very thankful to all of them. I would also like to thank Priyanka Agrawal for such a smooth introduction and Drishti for being the moderator for today. So without any further ado, let's begin. I'll quickly share my screen. I hope my screen is visible. Is my screen visible now?
Yes, madam. Yes, madam.
Yes.
So, like everyone has said here, this is the third part of the clause by clause discussion of CARO 2020. And I believe we've already covered 11 to 12 clauses in the last two sessions where esteemed speakers had spoken about the topics as Priyanka had mentioned. So I have been given certain clauses to address. So I will take them one by one. So before we go on to the clause discussion, I think it is very important for us to understand a few basics of CARO 2020. I'm sure most of us are well aware about it, but there could be some professionals who might be doing it for the first time or fresh professionals who would like to know about certain basics. So I also thought that it will be good to address them as well, so that it just sets a context, and then we can go up to the clauses that have been allocated to me. So what is CARO 2020? It is an order which is issued by the central government as per with the powers under section 143(11) of the Companies Act 2013. So the full form of CARO is Company Auditors Report Order. So it is basically an order which is issued by the central government. And who has given the power to the central government? It is the Companies Act. So herein, I have given the relevant extract of the section 143(11), which states, the central government may, in consultation with NAFRA, by general or special order. So it is talking about this order in respect of certain class of companies, will specify that the auditor's report will also include a statement on such matters as may be specified therein. So that means this CARO is in addition to the independent auditor's report that we issue as per the requirement of the Companies Act and the standards of auditing. This is an additional requirement for certain companies. And as the name suggests, CARO, that means Companies Auditors Report Order. This means that CARO 2020 is applicable only to companies, no other entity. So just to go down the time lane, this was first time issued in 2016, and it was superseded by this order number 849 on 25th February 2020. So the earlier CARO 2016 has certain clauses. It was upgraded. So CARO 2020 is the upgraded version and the latest version of CARO. Comment upon. Initially, it was applicable for the audits of FY 1920, but there were certain extensions. And for the first time, CARO 2020 was applicable for the audits of financial year 21-22. This would be probably on the cause of COVID, I guess. So this was so 21-22 was the first financial statements on which CARO 2020 was applicable. So it is quite recent. As I had suggested earlier, this CARO 2020 contains certain matters on which the auditors of companies have to make a statement in the audit reports. So what happens is in the independent audit report, we have a standard language. If we are going by an unqualified report or a clean report, the language remains the same. If we are giving emphasis on matter paragraph, there are certain issues that we feel is important for the users of the financial statements. We mention our point there. But in case of CARO, they have given 21 clauses, and 21 clauses address different aspects of the financial statements. So I think the government feels that it is important for the readers and the users of the financial statements to know about the auditor's opinion on those certain aspects of financial statements, which will help them in making fine. And this CARO is in a question and answer format. If you look at the language of the clause, it always starts with a question, wherein the auditor, based on the audit procedures that we have applied, based on the analysis that we have done, are required to give the statements either in yes and no and certain details. Now, let's go on to the applicability of CARO 2020. So, like I had said earlier, in the name of CARO itself, it says Company Auditors Report Order. That is, it is applicable to all companies only. And this companies includes, first, foreign companies, if we refer to section 242 of the Companies Act. So what is a foreign company? A company which is incorporated outside India, having a place of business in India, either through an agent, physically or electronically, and conducts the business activity in India. Then branches of a company. So herein we need to refer to section 143.8, read with rule 12 of the Companies Audit and Auditors Rule. So the duties of the branch auditor is same as of the company auditor. That is why if a company is required to comply with CARO, so its branch company auditor will also be required to comply with CARO. Project and liaison office established outside India. Now, if the principal entity on which CARO 2020 is applicable, then automatically the CARO 2020 will be applicable on the project or the liaison office as well. In case there are separate auditors appointed for the liaison office, then the company auditor of the principal company has to seek the report on CARO from the auditor of the liaison office. So again, it is applicable to all companies, which includes these companies as well. Now, what are the exceptions? When I say all companies, there could be certain entities on which CARO may not be applicable. So first, any banking company, which is defined under the Banking Regulation Act, insurance company licensed to operate under Section 8 of Companies Act 2013 or Section 25 of Companies Act 1956, basically a non-profit organization. One-person company, OPC, under Section 262. Small company, as per Section 285 of the Companies Act. Companies that converts to LLP or partnership or any other entity to which CARO 2020 is not applicable. Again, I'm repeating because CARO has the name company. Therefore, if the entity that you're auditing is an LLP, it's a partnership firm or any other company, or there is an instance that during the financial year, the company has converted from company to LLP or firm, then in that case also CARO 2020 will not be applicable because now the new entity is not a company. Infrastructure investment trusts or real estate investment trusts. Apart from these, there are certain private limited companies on which CARO is not applicable. Before I explain this, if we refer back to the previous slides, those were the exclusion list on which CARO was not specifically applicable. That means all the companies other than those, CARO will be applicable. However, there are certain private limited companies on which CARO will not be applicable. The first exclusion, if there is a private limited company which is a subsidiary or holding of a public company, then CARO 2020 will be applicable even if these conditions are met. But other than that, if a private limited company has a paid up share capital and reserve in surplus less than equal to 1 crore as on the balance sheet date, and total borrowings from the bank or financial institution at any point of time during the financial year, not just the closing balance, but at any point of time, it exceeds rupees 1 crore, is less than equal to 1 crore, and the total revenue as per Schedule 3 is less than equal to 10 crore during the financial. This means that when a private limited company, which is not a subsidiary or a holding company of a public company, complies with all these three conditions, that is why I have mentioned and in bold, then in that case, CARO 2020 will not be applicable. This is very important that all three conditions should be met. If any one of the condition gets flouted, let's say your turnover exceeds rupees 10 crores or the paid up share capital, reserve and surplus aggregate is greater than 1 crore, but rest of the two conditions are less, then in that case, CARO 2020 becomes applicable. This condition has to be seen for the financial year in which the audit is taking place. And this is very important because I've seen, even after so many years of practice, professionals struggle with determining the applicability of CARO 2020. Now that we have understood the few basics of CARO 2020, we have seen on which type of companies CARO 2020 is applicable. Now let's look at the matters that are to be included in the auditor's report as per CARO 2020. So there are 21 clauses of the paragraph 3 of the company's auditor's report order 2020. Out of 21, already few clauses have been addressed in the previous two sessions. I have been allocated the task to go through these 9 clauses in the next 2 hours so that I can apprise you with all of them. So if we look at it very briefly, as Priyanka had mentioned, I will be talking about the clause 3.6, which is maintenance of cost records as per section 148(1). Then clause 3.7, which talks about statutory dues, regular and disputed dues. Clause 3.8, unrecorded incomes. Clause 3.9. Clause 3.10, monies raised through IPO or FPO. Clause 3.11, fraud by the company or fraud on the company. Clause 3.12, special reporting in case of Nidhi companies. Clause 3.16, special reporting in case of NBFCs. Clause 3.17, cash losses incurred by the company. Clause 3.19, material uncertainty in case of financial ratio analysis. Clause 3.21, qualification and adverse remarks by the auditor. So let's start with the first clause that has been assigned to me. This is clause number 3.6, which talks about maintenance of cost records as per section 148(1) of the Companies Act 2013. I will read out the clause for you. See, look, this is the question answer format. So now they're asking us a question, us mane auditors. Whether maintenance of cost records has been specified by the central government under section 1 of section 148 of the Companies Act, and whether such accounts and records have been made and maintained. So if we look at the questions, there are 2 parts, and the auditor is required to comment on both the parts. So first, let's go through some basics related to cost records. So I have summarized few points related to the requirements of section 148(1) of the Companies Act. First, you need to understand what are the companies which are required to maintain cost records. Not all companies are required to maintain cost records. There is a certain list. So herein, we will refer to the Rule 3 of the Companies Cost Records and Audit Rules 2014, in which there are 2 conditions. So first, the company falls under the regulated or non-regulated sectors specified in Table A and B of the Companies Cost Records and Audit Rules 2014. And the company from the production or service relating to these sectors is greater than 35 crores during the immediately. The company should be engaged in these regulated or non-regulated sectors as specified in Table A and B. And the turnover from the production or service related to these sectors should exceed rupees 35 crores. So continuing with the same discussion, let's have a look at the regulated and non-regulated sectors as per the Companies Cost Records and Audit Rules. So first we'll have a look at the regulated sectors which are contained in Table A. So there are 6 sectors. First we have telecommunication services by TRAI. generation, transmission, distribution, and supply of electricity by any body under Electricity Act, petroleum products regulated by the board under the Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board Act 2006, drugs and pharmaceuticals, fertilizers. And sixth is the sugar and industrial alcohol. So if your client, if the auditee is a company which is engaged in any of these 6 sectors, then it is required to maintain cost records provided these sectors it exceeds rupees 35 crores. Next, let's talk about table B, which talks about the non-regulated sectors. Now, this is quite a long table which had a list of 30 plus items, and keeping the paucity of time in mind, I did not feel it was important to include all those 30 sectors. You can feel free and go back and refer to table B, which is contained in Rule 3 of the company's cost records and audit rules. So I have enlisted few sectors, like if your client is engaged in mechanical appliances, in defense, space, atomic energy sectors, turbojets, turbopropellers, arms, ammunition and explosives, fuses, explosive detonators and igniters, radio, navigational aid and remote control apparatus. Now this is just I've just taken few points out of this list of 30 items. There are more items, so you can refer to them. And again, if your client is engaged in manufacturing or production or providing services under this sector, which is non-regulated sector, exceeds 35 crore, then the condition of maintenance of cost record is applicable to your client. Now that we've understood the applicability, we need to understand that what are the cost records. So cost of records are basically books of accounts, which gives you information on utilization of materials, labor, and other items of cost as applicable to the production of goods and provision of services. There is a specific form called Form CRA1 in which these books of accounts are to be maintained. The Form CRA1 basically has a format in which all these utilization of material, labor, cost items, it is enlisted. So it's a separate format from your financial books of accounts. And this has also been given in detail in section 148.1, read with the relevant rules. So now we have understood that what are the companies on which maintenance of cost record is applicable. We've understood what kind of cost records I need to maintain. So let's go forward. So apart from this, I also thought it's important to give a brief about cost audit, because we were talking about maintenance of cost records. We were talking about the applicability of the entities on which cost records are applicable. So this automatically flows to getting cost audit done as per section 148.1 requirements. Please don't get confused. This cost audit is separate from the statutory audit that you conduct under section 143. This is cost audit under section 148.1. So I will quickly give you a brief on which companies and what are the conditions under which cost audit is attractive. So if your client is engaged in the regulated sectors as per table 1, which I had given in the previous slide where there were 6 sectors like sugar, then in that case, if the annual turnover of the company from all the product and services during the immediately preceding financial year exceeds rupees 50 crores. So this is now, I'm talking about all the products. But if let's say your company, your client only has one product, then in that case, the annual turnover limit from that one individual product or service during immediately preceding financial year exceeds rupees 25 crores. Again, these limits are for getting audit done. That 35 crore limit is for maintenance of cost records. So these are separate limits. So again, if your client is falling under the regulated sectors as per table A and is crossing any of these 2 thresholds, depending whether there's a bouquet of product it is in manufacturing or where there is one particular product, then your client is required to get cost audit done under section 148.1 by a cost auditor. It's a separate statute requirement. If your client is falling under production or manufacturing, which falls under unregulated sectors as per table B, then in that case, my threshold limit is annual turnover of the company from all the product or services during the immediately financial year exceeding rupees 100 crores. For regulated sector, it is 50 crore. For unregulated sector, it is rupees 100 crores. But let's say your client only has one particular product or one service, there is no bouquet of products, then in that case, this limits fall down to rupees 35. Okay, is my screen visible?
Yes.
And I'm audible, right?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so I will skip these points and maybe start with clause number 8. So I think I had finished cost records, and I had gone on to clause 3.7, but because we're already like little late and there was some technical problem, so what I'll do is I'll skip clause 3.7 and I will directly go to clause 3.8. If we get time in the end, I will pick it up again. So clause 3.8 basically it talks about unrecorded income. Clause 3 states that whether any transactions not recorded in the books of account have been surrendered or disclosed as income during the year in tax assessments under Income Tax Act 1961. If so, whether the previously unrecorded income has been properly recorded in the books of account during the year. So let's first talk about the applicability of this particular clause. It says that transactions are not recorded in the books of accounts have been voluntarily surrendered or disclosed as income during the year in income tax assessments. So what happens is that your income tax assessments takes place. There is certain addition that is made by the officer, and now these transactions ideally they should have been shown as an expense or shown as an income in your books, but they were not recorded due to some problem or the other. So what is an undisclosed income? It includes any money, bullion, jewelry, or valuable article or thing or any income which has been added back to your income as per the income tax assessment. It is based on the entry of the books of accounts and any other documents or transaction. Again, your expense has been disallowed or any other income has been added back. It represents wholly or partly of income or property which has not been disclosed, or any other expense or deduction or allowance claimed under this act which is found to be false. So basically, any of these which happens, and this becomes a part of the undisclosed income, and this undisclosed income is required to be reported upon this particular clause. I will go straight to the audit reporting in this under this clause. First, I need to check, I as an auditor have to check with the management if I have made this disclosure in additional regulatory requirement of Schedule 3 to the Companies Act 2013. So we must have been aware that additional regulatory requirements were introduced to Schedule 3, and it specifically talks about disclosing regarding unrecorded income in those in that particular aspect. So this is the responsibility of the management to make the disclosure under additional regulatory requirement to Schedule 3. Once that disclosure has been made, so I can rely upon that and then cross-verify it, which I will be speaking in the next step. So I will take an MRL, a management representation letter, regarding all the assessments that have been completed during the financial year, if it has been disclosed to the auditor or not. And parallelly, cross-check the status from the income tax portal, e-proceedings and the outstanding demands tab. So first, the management is required, it is responsible for making the disclosure in the Schedule 3 to the Companies Act, that is there. Then I as an auditor will talk about the completeness of all the assessments as per which those particular addition has been made to the financial statements. And then parallelly, I can ask for the income tax login credentials, and very easily, I think for a particular financial year, probably it is 18, 19, or even before that, you can have an entire list of the e-proceedings that if the notice has been served or not, submissions have been made or not, order has been passed or not, and correspondingly, if there's any outstanding demand. So this can be cross-checked from here, and then can be used for reporting on this particular clause on unrecorded incomes. Then the status check of the completed income tax assessment during the year. Then I also need to check the status of the completed income tax assessment. That I will take, ideally, if you are only conducting the income tax assessments of your client, or if there is an external, professional that is doing it, you seek the list of all the assessments that have been completed during the year. Then status check of the income tax assessment completed during the period between the end of financial year and date of signing audit report. So I'm basically addressing the events occurring after balance sheet date, which is AS4. And I need to refer to the SA 560, which talks about subsequent events. So if there is any other change that has taken place during this year, this will also impact my reporting under this clause on unrecorded income. Documentary evidence. Copy of the statements made in the course of search and survey to verify the nature of income so surrendered are disclosed. So what happens is that whenever there is addition made, or whenever there is any addition made of the expense or addition made to the income, then you take the statements which is given in the course of search and survey. There's a report that comes in which explains that why the addition has been made, what is the amount, from which date it has to be levied. Then you understand how it has to be represented in the financial statements and if it has been done or not. Proper recording of the surrendered or disclosed income in the financial statements. Check if the disclosure falls under definition of extraordinary income as per AS5. Then AS5 also, addresses this particular unrecorded income. So you need to see whether the management was compliant with AS5 while drafting its financial statements, specifically to the unrecorded incomes. So if we carry out these steps, that will help us giving us a conclusion and giving us our remark on clause 3.8, which talks about unrecorded income. Priyanka, is my screen visible? Am I audible? Is everything okay?
Yes, ma'am, everything is fine.
Great. Now let's move on to the next clause that was allotted to me, which was clause 3.10, which talks about money raised through IPO, that is initial public offer, or further public offer. Now this particular clause also has certain subclauses. So I'll walk them through one by one. So first we'll talk about clause 3.10a. If we read the language of the clause here, it states, whether the money is raised by way of initial public offer or further public offer, including debt instruments, during the year were applied for the purposes for which those are raised. If not, the details together with delays or default and subsequent rectification, if any, as may be applicable, be reported. So let's have a look at some basics. I will talk about the applicability. IPO, the initial public offer, or further public offer, it includes the issue of the following instruments. So first, obviously, the equity shares, convertible securities, non-convertible debt securities, non-convertible redeemable preference shares, perpetual debt instruments, perpetual non-cumulative preference shares, Indian depository receipts, securitized debt instruments, and it excludes the following: offer for sale of specified securities, that is equity shares and convertible securities, to the public by any existing holder. So this is not sale of securities at large. You are basically giving those sale to a particular existing holder. It's more of a private issue. So that is why it will not be covered under this scope. And monies which are raised from foreign capital markets by way of issuance of GDRs, that is Global Depository Receipts, and ADRs, American Depository Receipts. So these two are excluded from the definition of IPO or FPO for the purpose of reporting under this clause 3.10a. Coming to the audit procedures. So first, understand the proposed end use of the money being raised through IPO and FPO as mentioned in the offer document. If I go back to the language of the clause, so it has two parts to it. That first of all, whether any money was raised by IPO or FPO, like it says here, right? Very importantly, it not just only talks about that whether the money was raised or not. Most importantly, this clause talks about the purpose for which the money that was raised has been applied. And if it has not been applied, then what was the delay or default? So basically, the government wants the auditor to comment upon the correct application of the money which was raised from the public, so that it does not get misused or people are not duped when they put in their money in your client or in a certain company. So coming back to the audit procedures, if we look at the second part of the clause, it directly hits that part wherein I mention here that you need to understand the proposed end use of the money being raised as mentioned in the offer document. Seek the MRA, Management Representation Letter, for what? It mentions the completeness of the disclosure with regard to end use of the money raised. Now, if we look back to my previous point, the end use of the money can be verified from the offer document. So offer document is the official document through which you apply for the IPO or FPO. And in that offer document, the company is required to mention that for the purpose of which I'm raising the money. So you seek, now that becomes a documentary evidence. In addition to that, you seek the MRA, wherein you mention the disclosure with regard of the end use of the money raised. Then ask the management for what purpose have you used the money for, which was raised by the IPO or the FPO. So when I put in this point, it becomes like a comparison between what was proposed in the offer document that, okay, I will be raising money for particular A or particular B aspect. But when you look at the actual end, there could be some difference. So that is why we seek clarification from the management on both aspects, that what was initially proposed and what actually happened. Then appointment of a financial institution to monitor the end use of the proceeds. This is required by the company to do it so that they are also under check, that money that they are being raised is checked by an external agency, which is a financial institution. Once you seek this MRL, now you as an auditor compare the proposed versus actual end utilization. It is very easy. This can be only possible when you have both the information. That is why we make it part of the MRL. That is why you seek that information from the management. Then only you'll be able to do that comparison as a part of your audit procedure. If you're not able to verify the end use due to some reason or the other, there is some objection from the management, or you do not have complete documentation, or you're not able to connect with the financial institution, then you disclose the fact along with the reasons for non-verification under this particular clause C10A. You mentioned that the verification of end use could not take place. I need to mention this because I am required to comment upon the utilization of the money that is being raised. So if I was not able to do it, so I need to mention it here. Awareness regarding applicable provisions of SEBI LODR regulations. So obviously this is a statutory part, and IPO and FPO procedure and all those regulations, they born from from SEBI LODR regulations. So I, as an auditor, if my client has raised money through IPO and FPO, if I am required to comment on this particular clause of CARO, then I need to educate myself about the applicable provisions and see if they are being applied properly and if the company has complied with them or not. If the financial institution was appointed by the management to monitor the end user proceeds, then in that case, you obtain the report which was submitted by the financial institution to the SEBI regarding the end user proceeds. So herein again, I am referring to essay regarding usage of the work of an expert or of an external agency, which will help me in gathering audit evidence to report upon this particular clause of CARO. So herein, you obtain the report submitted by the financial institution to the SEBI. Now situations, there could be situation wherein the offer for sale of specified securities, that is equity shares or convertible securities, is made to the public by an existing holder. So if you refer back to this slide, I had specifically mentioned that this is not applicable to, okay, here are the exclusions. If you are giving privately, or if you are offering the sale of specified securities to an existing holder, it is not included in definition of IPO and FPO. But there is an additional audit procedure regarding that, which states, if we are making it, the offer of the sale of specified securities is made to the public by the existing holder. Then you check if the management has disclosed the fact in the financial statements or not. So it's basically, it's an extended chain that you had sold those shares to existing holder, and now that share that was sold to existing holder is being sold out to the public. So this becomes a very specific situation, and the audit procedures will be applied accordingly. This particular disclosure needs to be made in the financial statements. Now check that the monies that were being raised has been kept in a separate bank account for utilization of a specified purpose in line of the provision of Section 40 of the Companies Act 2013. So when the company engages a financial institution to check upon the end use, the first requirement of the financial institution is that the money has to be kept in a separate bank account. It is allocated and demarcated separately from your other bank accounts so that you can monitor the usage of that particular fund. So this also becomes very important, that compliance is being done, and all the provisions to know about the certain provision, you need to go to Section 43 of the Companies Act. And first of all, obviously, I need to be aware about this provision and then see if it has been applied properly or not. Non-application of money as it was raised just at the end of the year. Okay. Now, there could be an instance, let's say I'm sitting in the last quarter of the financial year and the money has been raised in March. There is very short period wherein I could not, apply the money for the purpose for which it was raised because of practical difficulties, or the time limit was very less. So in this particular instance, you mentioned this fact in CARO 2020 that the money was raised at the fag end of the financial year. If the money was utilized between end of the financial year and signing of the audit report, again, this becomes subsequent event, and we talk about AS4 here. Can you report in line with SA 516? So this automatically becomes a part of your scope, even if that money was applied after the end of financial year, because you were conducting audit at that point of time. So you are required to comment upon this particular aspect in clause C10A. If the monies were temporarily used for the purposes to earn interest till the time of actual utilization, mention this fact in CARO 2020. So we are talking about an instance wherein, let's say, the money was raised for a particular purpose. Now there is a certain timeline for that purpose which has not come yet. You cannot put in the money for that particular purpose because there is some time. So as a good practice, why to while away that money? You can make up some interest on that money by storing in that particular financial instrument. So in that case, but this has to be a temporary arrangement. You have to be very careful. You have to understand this money should not have been raised primarily for earning interest. It has to be utilized for the purpose. But since you understand the intent of the management, maybe take an MRL, sit with them, have a meeting, and understand that why this money was invested to earn interest. So just as a safeguard for the auditors, you should maintain this fact in CARO 2020. You should make the financial statement users aware about this fact, that this money was invested to earn interest till the utilization. There could be an instance wherein even when the audit gets completed, and the money was not actually put to use, again due to some XYZ reason, and the money is still kept in a bank account and you're earning interest. So you mentioned that fact here. So basically we will be clubbing these 2 points, and then you comment in the auditor's report and give the disclosure accordingly. Now, money not utilized for the stated purpose. This entire point, this entire clause is basically dependent upon the fact that whether the money is being utilized for the stated purpose or not. If that does not happen, then what do you do? Then again, you mentioned the fact in the CARO 2020. You mentioned the nature of default. You mentioned that the purpose was, A, and it has applied for B, or it has not applied at all. You mentioned the details of subsequent steps taken to rectify this mistake, if any. So in this case, you speak to the management to talk about the ATR, the action taken report, to rectify this mistake, to rectify this default. There could be an instance wherein this particular default was not rectified. So you also mentioned here. So my entire point is that I, as an auditor, need to come clean to the user of the financial statement that money was raised. It was not utilized for this particular purpose. This was the default. This was the particular rectification step that were taken during my course of audit period, or there were no steps taken to rectify this particular mistake. Now let's have a look at the reporting language. So, money raised by way of IP or FPO, including debt instruments, for the purpose for which they were raised, except for the following cases. Now, I'm talking about an instance that where I'm giving a generic statement that whatever money was raised by IP and FPO, they were applied, they were utilized for the purposes were raised, but there were certain exceptions. So herein, if we look at the guidance note, it talks about a certain tabular format in which you can give the default. It becomes more presentable and easier for the user of financial statement to understand. So I will just quickly read the headings of the column. So you will talk about the nature of the fund raised, whether it was equity, whether it was debt, what was the instrument. Then the purpose for which the funds were raised. Again, you refer to the offer document, you refer to the minutes and whatever information you have sought during the audit procedure. The total amount that has been raised and opening unutilized balance. When I mention about opening unutilized balance, that means the money was raised in the previous financial year and has not been used even during the course of the audit period. Amount utilized for the other purpose. When I say other purpose, which means the purpose other than the purpose that was defined in the offer document. Unutilized balance as at the balance sheet date. If you talk about the unutilized balance, that okay, this amount is still being unutilized, and you need to mention that why is this amount still being unutilized. There could be an instance wherein you need to spend the money in tranches. There could be a milestone-based project. So the milestone has not been achieved. Other particular conditions for completing that milestone have not been achieved. That is why the balance has been unutilized. Details of default, reason or delay, subsequently rectified or not, and details. If we are able to present the information for the exception, this particular tabular format, I think it brings transparency to the CARO, and it also becomes easier for the user of financial statement to understand it. Now let's move on to the next sub-clause of clause 310. This is clause 310B. Priyanka, am I audible? Is it okay? All good?
Everything is fine.
Great. So let me read out the clause. Whether the company has made any preferential allotment or private placement of shares or convertible debentures during the year? And if so, whether the requirements of Section 42 and 62 of the Companies Act have been complied with and the funds raised have been used for the purpose of which the funds were raised. If not, provide the default and the nature of non-compliance. So in the previous point, we were talking about IPO and FPO. In this particular point, we're talking about preferential allotment or private placement of shares. So here my scope becomes a little different. The nature of reporting is the same. That I need to check whether the funds have been raised and I need to see whether they've been applied for the purpose of which they have been raised and then mention non-compliance. But my scope differs a little from the first clause. So first, let's talk about the ability. It talks about the private placement. What is private placement? It basically means invitation to subscribe to shares made to only a select group of persons, preferably less than 200, through issue of a private placement offer cum application letter. This is not a public offer. It is given, basically you are allotting shares to a small group of persons through a placement offer cum application letter. And this basically becomes a document to refer to when we talk about the audit procedures. The purpose of private placement, and also the scope of this particular clause 310B includes wherein the company intends to increase the subscribed capital base. Let's talk about the audit procedures related to clause 310B. First of all, obviously, the auditor has to be aware about Section 42 of the Companies Act and applicable rules. So I've just given a brief here. So if I need to, privately allocate shares to a particular small group of people, there has to be a special resolution passed by the shareholders. The invitation has been made to a prescribed number of persons. Now, I had mentioned in my previous slide that prescribed number of persons has to be less than 200. And there is a specific clause that if you violate this particular condition that you are crossing that 200 limit or there are other conditions also, then this invitation will be deemed to be an offer to public. And now the provisions of public offer will become applicable. It will not be treated as a private placement. New offers cannot be made till the time the old offers are completed. Then has to be allotted within 60 days from date of receipt of the application money, failing which the application money will be paid back within 15 days from the end of 60 days. In case the amount is not repaid, then you also need to pay interest from the expiry of the 60th day. So these are certain conditions under Section 42 and the rules which the auditor needs to be aware of. So first, obviously, you do your homework, understand that, okay, these are the conditions. You can make a checklist around this and then tick it off and see if all these compliances have been made by the company pertaining to compliance of this particular clause 310B. Again, just like an IPO or FPO, the money received has to be kept on a separate bank account in a scheduled bank and will not be utilized for purpose other than adjustment against allotment of securities, repayment of monies where the company was not able to allot the securities. So these are the specific purpose of which the money should be utilized and how it should be kept. Then no public advertisement can be made to inform the public at large about such an offer because it's not an IPO or FPO, right? You are privately allocating those shares to a particular group of persons. So you cannot make public advertisement. And very importantly, there is an MCA compliance regarding filing of TAS3 within 15 days from date of allotment, which includes information like the names, address, number of securities allotted, etc. So this is a list. I know everything cannot be fit in here, but the reason of walking you through these particular clauses is that in case your client has made any private placement of shares and you want a ready referencer, you can use this particular slide and make a checklist and then tick off all the compliances and see whether your client is compliant with the provisions of Section 42 or not. Now, if you contravene the provision Section 42, there are separate penal provisions under the Companies Act for the director and promoter, and the money has to be refunded. So all of this compliance, whether there was PS3 filed or not, whether there was contravention, you need to report this under clause 310B. Now let's talk about compliance or provision of Section 62 and the applicable rules. So this is applicable only when the company intends to increase the base of the subscribed share capital. It has to be authorized by a special resolution. In case of listed entities, preferential offer has to be made as per SEBI provisions in addition to the Companies Act provision. So herein, not only the Section 62 has to be complied with, if you are, an auditor of a listed entity and CARO is obviously applied to a listed entity, then in that case, you need to be well aware about the applicable SEBI provisions also in this particular clause. and see if they've been complied with or not. In case of violation of provision of section 42 and 62 of the Companies Act and applicable SEBI provision, provided you are auditing a listed entity, you can use this following reporting language. So again, if we refer back to the guidance note, they have made a tabular format for the ease of understanding, for the ease of reporting and ease of understanding by the user of the financial statements. So herein you mentioned first the nature of securities that have been raised, that is equity shares, preference shares, or convertible debentures. Then type of issue, the type of issue that forms part of the scope of clause 310B, whether it is preferential allotment or private placement, amount involved, and nature of non-compliance. So this is how you will present the information wherein the provision of section 42 and 62 get violated. Also, additionally, examine the purpose for which the funds were raised by going through the form PAS4. So now this form PAS4 is also a compliance requirement of the Companies Act. You file this form with the MCA. So this again becomes a documentary evidence, and it very clearly contains the purpose for which the funds were raised under section 42 and 62. Check if the company has disclosed the objects of issue in the explanatory statement and notice of the general meeting. Compare the same with the actual utilization. In addition to form PAS4, you can also refer to the explanatory statement which is given in the notice of the general meeting in which the special resolution has to be passed. And then you compare both the reasons. So that also becomes an additional check when you are when you want to report under clause 310B. Again, this is a repeat point from clause 310A. If the monies were temporarily used for the purpose to earn interest at the time of actual utilization, you mentioned this fact in CARO 2020. I've already covered in this clause 310A. Again, if the money was not applied for the purpose it was raised, or it was not or applied for any other purpose at the end of financial year, then you make the following reporting. You mentioned this fact in CARO 2020. If the money was utilized between end of financial year and signing of audit report in line with SA 560. The money was not utilized for the stated purpose, mention the fact, mention nature of default, and detail subsequent steps which is taken to rectify this mistake. Now, this reporting is similar to clause 310A when you talk about IPO and FPO. Here, because ultimately my end purpose of reporting under both of these subclauses is to report on the actual utilization of the money that was raised. And again, they have used a reporting language here. This is similar to what we had shown in the previous clause 310A. So you will say, in our opinion, and according to information explanation given to us, the company has utilized the funds raised by, now here the language will change. You will not talk about IPO or FPO. You will mention the language of the clause 310B, the preferential allotment or private placement on convertible debenture for the purpose except for the following. Here the headings are same as that were given in clause 310A. So this format, a language becomes very useful. It becomes like a ready reckoner for you when you want to report under this particular clause 310B. Now let's move on to clause 311A. We are done with clause 310. I'm moving on to clause 311A, which talks about fraud by the company or fraud on the company. The language of the clause goes like this: whether any fraud by the company and any fraud on the company. So company पर fraud और company ने जो fraud किया, दोनों पे आपको यहाँ पे comment करना है. It has been noticed or reported during the year. If yes, the nature and the amount involved is to be indicated. Just like all other clauses, this particular clause also has two aspects. That first of all, during the course of audit, if you have noticed or reported, if in your knowledge, whether you speak to the management, obviously, in the coming slide, I'll explain you how this fraud has to be identified. This is a separate issue. So, अगर कंपनी पर फ्रॉड हुआ है या कंपनी ने फ्रॉड किया है, तो पहले मेरे को इसका एक अफर्मेटिव आंसर चाहिए. और अगर हुआ है, then I need to comment upon the nature and the amount involved. Let's talk about the scope of this particular clause. Auditor's comments on the frauds on or by the company in the knowledge of the management occurred during the period covered by the auditor's report. Now see, ऐसा नहीं है कि आपको निकालना है फ्रॉड जो मैनेजमेंट की नॉलेज में है और आपको कन्वे किया गया है कि हाँ ये फ्रॉड हमारी कंपनी पे हुआ है या हमारी कंपनी से हुआ है, आपके जो ऑडिट पीरियड के अंदर है उसमें आप पे कमेंट करना है. Additionally, frauds noticed during the course of audit, because ये particular point में हो सकता है इसमें only reference दिया जा रहा है to the financial year on which the audit is being conducted. In this second point, I'm talking about the frauds noticed during the course of audit. That is after the end of the financial year till the audit report has been concluded. Fraudulent act resulting in material misstatement in financial statements to reported herein. I've given few examples. So, material misstatement in financial statement are of two types. First, misstatement from fraudulent financial reporting. So, few examples would be manipulation, falsification, alteration of accounting records or supporting documents, misrepresentation or intentional omission from financial statements, intentional misapplication of accounting principles related to measurement, recognition, classification, presentation, or disclosure. This has already been covered under SA 240 in quite detail. Also in SA 705 and 706, we talk about the qualification report. Second, misstatement arises from misappropriation of assets, which talks about theft of entities' assets, embezzlement, collusion amongst employees, stealing physical or intangible assets. So, any fraudulent act which results in this, which could have been reported by the management or which could have been discovered by the auditor. So, in this particular case, it becomes a part of scope of reporting under clause 311A. Reporting under this clause is in addition to the auditor's responsibility defined in SA 240, like I had mentioned, and also the provisions of section 143(12) of the Companies Act 2013. So let's say you are auditing a company which is not Caro, there's no requirement for the Caro to be applied in that particular company. That does not absolve you from the responsibility to comment upon the fraud, because in any way SA 240 talks about the auditor's responsibility regarding fraud, and the provisions of section 143(12), because you are doing audit under section 143 of the Companies Act 2013. So 143(12) also talks about the fraud reporting by the auditor. This clause 311A is in addition to your responsibility as a statutory auditor. So this is like a 3-level, reporting that the government is expecting from the auditors regarding fraud. It is a very tricky clause, I totally agree, and it is very difficult to do it practically, but it is what it is. Let's look at the audit procedures. So very importantly, MRA, management representation, needs to be sought, which we'll mention. This is basically the management is contemplating. Management is stating that it is aware of any known fraud or suspected fraud that the company is investigating. Management acknowledges its responsibility for implementation and operation of accounting and internal control system that are designed to prevent and detect frauds and errors. So when I'm using this language, I'm basically shifting the primary responsibility of fraud detection, of fraud monitoring in the hands of the company, in the hand of the management. I'm saying that the management needs to design its system. It should be designed in such a manner that it should prevent fraud, or it should be able to catch fraud. The designing and the operating effectiveness should be such that it is able to detect frauds. The management has to carry the risk assessment related to material misstatement in financial statements. That's the responsibility of the management. And then share the results with the auditor that, okay, this is the assessment that we have carried out. This is the risk and control matrix that we have. And as per us, these are the following problems, the following risks that can take place. Material misstatement resulting identified by the auditor but not corrected by the management are immaterial. So in this particular case, there could be an instance where material misstatements were identified by the auditor, which may not be very much material. It will not form part of the management representation letter. Second, review internal audit reports to ascertain whether any fraud has been reported or noticed by the internal auditor. Now, if your client is required to get internal audit done as per the provision of section 138, or it is voluntarily getting any, internal audits done from its process auditors, they could be an in-house team or they could be an external professional, then you can use that as a source. You can use it as a documentary evidence to look for any fraud-related observations that were made in the internal audit reports. Again, I'm referring to SA 610 or SA 620, wherein you rely upon the work of the internal auditor. And then you can see if it can come handy to comment upon this particular clause 311. MOM of the audit committee board to check for fraudulent incidents and action taken report on the same. Again, when we refer back to the minutes of the board, minutes of the audit committee, that means the management is also participating actively, taking proactive role in identifying fraud and with the intent to kill whatever kind of fraud is, available or present in the organization. And see if there were any incidents and what was the ATR, the action taken report on the same. In addition to the management, discuss the matter of fraud with other employees, including officers of the company. So not only management, obviously that is your first point of contact, but you can refer to the major stakeholders, maybe, a head of a procurement team or head of the finance, who can actually apprise you of certain incidents which may have been left by the management to be discussed regarding the fraud. Now, let's talk about the reporting. Any adverse findings and other clauses of CARO 2020 analyze if such finding was fraudulent in nature. So, sorry, this is audit procedure only, that you have 21 clauses of CARO 2020, and there could be any adverse reporting regarding PP, regarding inventory, regarding cash losses, and you need to analyze if that has any fraudulent angle. If it has fraudulent angle, then there'll be a repeat reporting under clause 311A also. You have mentioned an adverse remark certain in that particular applicable clause. Let's say we talk about the working capital limit clause, wherein the stock and debtor statement do not match with the balances appearing in the books. That is a major, non-compliance. And you feel it is fraudulent, the books could be fudged. So that is related to this particular clause 311A. They will be repeat reporting under CARO but under separate clauses. Now we'll go to the reporting part, wherein you can use illustration to report. This is an instance when the auditor comes across fraud or by the company. So I've just taken a small example from the guidance note. The facts can change, obviously, according to whatever reason that has resulted in fraud. We have been informed that the accountant of the company had misappropriated funds amounting to rupees 10 lakh during preceding year and the year under audit. Investigations are in progress and the accountant has been dismissed and arrested. The company has withheld his terminal benefits and it is estimated the amount is misappropriated may not exceed the terminal benefits to the accountant. The company is also adequately covered by the fidelity insurance cover. I will break it down for you. So in the first part, we are giving the fact. We are mentioning that the accountant had misappropriated the funds. So that fraud part has been mentioned. Then we have quantified the fraud here by mentioning the amount of fraud that has taken place. After that, we have talked about the corrective action that the management has taken, that the investigation are in progress, the accountant has been dismissed, his terminal benefits have also been withdrawn. So when we talk about this, it shows a positive act or a good act on part of the company to take steps to fight fraud. And it is has a positive impact on the users of the financial statement. That is why the government wants us to make specific disclosure on this particular clause. And then lastly, they have also talked about that even the terminal benefits have been withdrawn, on and on, it's like a benefit for the company only because the terminal benefits will not exceed the loss that has taken place. So the outflow is perpetually less. And the company is also covered by the fidelity insurance cover. That even the fraud has taken place, the corrective action has been taken, and the economic outflow is not substantial or it's very less, so the company is in good hands. So this is like illustration of the language that you can use to report under clause 311A. Let's talk about 311B, which also is on the fraud by or on the company. The language of clause 311B is whether any report under subsection 12 of section 143 has been filed by the auditors in ADT 4 as per the provision of the Companies Audit and Auditors Rule. So here, if we look at the provision of section 143.12, we need to report the fraud only when it exceeds rupees 1 crore against the company by the employees, concluded by the auditor. And this information is shared by the auditor in form ADT 4. So I've made a small diagram that here, if you look at day 0, the fraud was discovered by the entity. Now, if the entity has discovered the fraud, the entity reports the matter to the board on the audit committee. Sorry, this fraud has been discovered by the auditor. I'm very sorry. And this auditor informs the matter to the board and audit committee within 2 days of discovery. Now, when the matter has been reported, within 45 days, the board and the audit committee is required to comment back and to share their remarks. And once those remarks have been received from the board or the audit committee, the auditor is required to submit the ADT 4 to the board or the committee, to the central government within 15 days. Now, in case no response is received from the board or the audit committee, then you give the ADT 4 to the central government. So this is what the provision of section 143.12 entails. So what do? First, you need to see whether reporting was required to be done on section 143.12 or not, matlab whether it's applicable or not. Then see the fraud can be an event which occurs after the balance sheet date as well. Also, this particular clause, it also covers the fraud reported by a cost accountant or the company secretary under the applicable version of the Companies Act. MRL needs to be taken from the cost account or the company secretary. So here it has an extended scope. It's not only CA, but any other fraud that was discovered by these two professionals, that will also be required to be commented upon on Clause 311B. Clause 311C, whether the auditor has considered whistleblower complaints, if any, received during the year by the company. So very easily, as the language says, that if there were any whistleblower complaints that were received by the company, the auditor needs to consider that. And there are certain provisions regarding vigil mechanism, which talks about whistleblower complaints under section 177(9) and SEBI, and they're applicable to these entities: listed company, company which accepts deposits from the public, company which has borrowed money from banks and public financial institutions in excess of rupees 50 crores. On voluntary basis also, company can create a whistleblower policy. It's good to have, it's not mandatory. But for these particular entities, it is mandatory to have a whistleblower mechanism. So first, you need to understand whether the company was required to establish a whistleblower mechanism. So if it was required, then check. If the ethics or the hotline process, it is adequate, the process is there, there is a policy defined, and how are the anonymous complaints handled. Check if there is a process to accept confidential submission of concerns about questionable accounting, internal controls, or audited matters. Check if there were action taken report, and check the compliance of the applicable provisions of Companies Act and SEBI. So obviously, the auditor has to be well aware about the applicable provisions of Companies Act 2013 and SEBI regarding whistleblower mechanism, and then you see the compliance part. Cases where the company had established the whistleblower mechanism voluntarily, that is cases where the company was not required or mandated by law to make it, but they anyway made it. Then you apply the same procedure above regarding the advocacy. Now, cases where the company was required to have a whistleblower mechanism, but it did not establish, then check if the company had still received any whistleblower complaints, review the complaints if the company shares it with you, and understand how the action was taken on these reports. So even though the company might have not designed a policy, but if they are transparent enough to share the complaints with you, so you can understand if the process may not be formulated because maybe the company is not that big, but they have taken certain actions to address those complaints. Review the minutes of audit committee and board meetings to identify the whistleblower complaints and how they were dealt with. Obtain written representation from the management board committee regarding the completeness, evaluation of complaints, and the ATMs. The reporting language can go something like this. For a listed company which is required to establish a vigil mechanism, we have taken into consideration the whistleblower complaints received by the company during the year while determining the NTE of the audit procedures. For companies which had voluntarily, which were not required to establish vigil mechanism, but they have anyway voluntarily received the complaints, the language will change a little. You will say that we have taken into consideration the whistleblower complaints received by the company during the year and shared with us for reporting under this clause. Where there were no whistleblower complaints received, you will say, as represented to us by the management, there were no whistleblower complaints received by the company during the year. So again, these are some templates of language that you can use while reporting under clause 311C, depending upon which situation is applicable to your company. Let's move on to clause 312, which talks about special reporting in case of Nidhi companies. So in case of Nidhi companies also, there are clause 312A, B, and C. So first, clause 312A talks about the compliance for the Nidhi company to have net owed funds to the deposit in the ratio of 1:20. Then whether it is maintaining 10% unencumbered term deposits as per the Nidhi rules, and whether there has been any default in payment of interest or deposits or repayment therefore for the period and ending. So quickly, now this is a very rarely used clause because it is applicable only when you're auditing a Nidhi company. So I think I will very quickly run you through this because this, in my opinion, may not be applicable to a lot of audience who is present here. So the company is incorporated with the objects of cultivating habit of thrift and saving amongst its members, lending deposits to its members, receiving deposits. There is section 620A of the Companies Act. So if you are auditing a Nidhi company, you need to be well aware about this particular statute and Nidhi rules. So obviously, first you need to review the compliance of the Nidhi rules. So I have shared few compliances. For example, so we'll talk about this very importantly because this net owned funds has been mentioned in the subclause A of clause 312. So what is net owned funds before we go on to the condition? It is basically aggregate of the paid up equity share capital and free reserve reduced by the losses or intangible assets. The net owned fund, if it exceeds rupees 10 lakhs, then this compliance has to be done regarding Nidhi rules. Then second condition was regarding unencumbered term deposit less than equal to 10% of the outstanding deposits. Ratio of net owned funds to deposit has to be less than equal to 1:20. And there is a deposit liability that is computed by the Nidhi company. So all these points, they are covered in quite detail in Nidhi rules. I will not be able to walk you through here. The reason of mentioning these points here is because this becomes like a checklist again. When if all these conditions are being complied, you need to check the compliances and it becomes a part of your audit plan. And accordingly, you'll be able to report upon the compliance bit of the Nidhi companies. Now, there is also a form NDH3, which will become a documentary evidence in case of auditing a Nidhi company, which has to be filed half-yearly. It contains details like deposits, loans, financial summaries, banks, etc. So you examine that form, you seek the information from there, and then report under this clause accordingly. Report on defaults made by the company at year-end, and defaults, if they were existing during the period, they were made good. Report on dispute between Nidhi company and depositor. Specific reporting. Now, because if you look at these three clauses, this is basically the circumstance represents clause 12A, 12B, and 12C. So in case of 12A, you have to report the shortfall and state the actual ratio of NOF to deposits. In case of 12B, the amount of shortfall. In case of 12C, you mention nature of default. Now you can make this in a tabular format also for the purpose of ease. Amount of default, period, number of person, any other detail. Now let's move to clause 316A, which talks about reporting in case of NBFC. So herein, this clause specifically addresses the provision of section 45IA of the Reserve Bank of India, because that mandates or that rules the NBFCs and whether registration has been obtained or not. So what is NBFC? Engage in the business of loan advances, acquisition of shares, stock, bonds, debentures, leasing, hire purchase, insurance, chit fund, but excludes agriculture activity, industrial activity, sale, purchase, construction of immovable property. So again, this will be applicable only if your auditee is an NBFC. And when you go to audit an NBFC, you need to be well aware about the provisions of section 45IA of the Companies Act. I've given definition here. It has been borrowed from the section itself. Here are the registration requirements, that when the company's principal business financial activity, which is a definition here, there's a 50-50 test, which is that the company's financial asset, they constitute 50% of the total assets and constitute 50% of the gross income. And the registration certificate is obtained from the RBI. So this becomes, your compliance check, your documentary evidence as a starting point of your audit procedure when you need to report on the special reporting in case of NBFCs. So first, obviously, the audit procedure is to understand the activities, and you compare that, okay, whatever activity the NBFC is doing, it falls under the applicable provision of the RBI. Then you conduct the 50-50 test. Remember the ratio that I was talking about here, that whether it is constituting 50% of total assets or whether it is constituting 50% of the gross income. If that is being complied with, then you compare the actual with the amount here, and then you give the comment accordingly. Check if the company has NOF as required as per NBFC registration. In case registration has not been sought as per NBFC, then you need to understand the reason and state it here, because the registration is very important for an NBFC to function. The next clause, 316B, it talks about the housing finance organization. So it is saying that whether the NBFC or the housing finance activities have been conducted without a valid COR, a certificate of registration. Now, this specific clause talks about only certificate of registration only. So I'm skipping the definition of housing activity here so that we can cover additional clauses as well. So first I need to understand whether the company is an NBFC or it falls in definition HFC or not. Then repeat all the steps. You take the written recommendation. This is very relevant for this particular clause. If the certificate of registration was sought, if it was not sought, whether it was withdrawn, revoked, suspended, and surrendered. If the business was continued even after such negative activity. Report if the company has conducted the activities without the holding of valid certificate registration with the reasons of non-registration. Because the specific clause talks about the registration aspect only, hence it becomes very important for us to understand the reason behind withdrawal, the reason for the company to continue the activities, and the reason for non-renewal of registration. That why isn't the company taking adequate steps to seek the registration back? This clause C is about a core investment company. Again, it is a very specific clause and very rarely used clause, so I will skip it in the interest of time. And let's move on to clause. Yes, 317. 317 talks about the cash losses in the financial year and in the immediately preceding financial year. And if so, if there were any cash losses, you need to state the amount. So first, let's understand the audit. So first, obviously, it talks about cash losses. So how will you determine the cash losses? So there's a process. If the company is required to follow accounting standards, then the cash loss would be net profit or loss as per SPL, post the adjustment of non-cash transactions like depreciation. If it is an Ind AS compliant company, then you take the profit and loss figure, excluding the OCI part, as per the statement of profit and loss after the adjustment of non-cash transaction. So this particular figure becomes your cash loss. The amount of net profit or loss after tax will not be adjusted for item of expenses of contingent nature. You need to be careful about this. So with this step, I'm trying to make you understand how do you determine the cash loss. Once the cash loss has been determined, then we go on to the next part. In case, let's say the auditor's opinion is qualified with respect to computation of cash losses. Now, determination of cash loss is not only the requirement of Caro. You anyway have to determine them as a part of your audit. And if you differ with the methodology that has been adopted by the company, and hence you give a qualified opinion in your independent audit report, then you need to mention in this clause that my independent audit report was qualified because of wrong method of computation of cash losses. Because this particular clause talks about the computation of cash losses and along with the quantification. The effect of qualification has to be taken for both proceeding, because if you look at the definition, it says that I need to mention about the cash losses in the current financial year and in the immediately preceding financial year. So the reporting has to be done for both the financial years. The comment on cash losses has to be given separately as stated, even if the cash loss was incurred only in one financial year. Let's say in current financial year there was a cash loss, in preceding financial year there was no cash loss, then also you need to comment here. Next clause we have is regarding 319, which is material uncertainty in case of financial ratios. Priyanka, I will quickly take 5 minutes, then we can take questions after that. I've almost reached the last clause now. On the basis of financial ratios, aging and expected date of realization of financial assets, payment of financial liabilities, and other information, auditor knowledge of board of directors management plan. So basically, in this clause, the auditor is required to comment upon the material uncertainty on basis of all this information that has been sought from the management, whether it is financial ratios, aging analysis, date of realization of financial assets. The auditor has to give the opinion that there is no material uncertainty existing on the date of audit report, not only balance sheet date, because herein we are taking the period between the balance sheet date and the audit report, that the company is capable of meeting its liabilities and as and when they fall due within the period of 1 year from the balance sheet date. So this is a little complicated. I think I'll quickly go to the brief part. Okay. So when you talk about material uncertainty, our attention directly goes to the concern assessment and SA 570. So if we look at AS1, it is the management standard responsibility to carrying out going concern assessment. The same has been stated in SA 570, which talks about going concern analysis. Material uncertainties related to the events or condition which may cause significant doubt upon entity's ability to continue as a going concern. This has to be disclosed in the financial statement. So the management tells that, okay, I have carried out my going concern assessment, and in my opinion, there are certain events or conditions which can impact the entity's ability to continue as a going concern. So that has to be mentioned. Second reference of related to this particular clause is Schedule 3 to the Companies Act, which requires the board to state if the net realization value of the assets other than PPE and non-current assets is less than book value. So here I'm referring to AS13, AS2, which talks about the inventory, which talks about investments. If the cost value is less than the net realizable value, if net realizable value is less than the cost value, then you need to mention here and you need to disclose the same in your financial statements. Financial ratios forming part of the additional regulatory requirements. So there were 12 new financial ratios which were introduced, which were required to be reported by the management, which is current ratio, debt equity ratio, return on equity, trade receivable, trade payable. Not only the ratios were required to be given, but the management was also required to give the deviation in the current year ratio to the previous year ratio if the deviation exceeded 25%. So the reason I'm giving you these points is that this can become a reference point to comment upon the material uncertainty. And this this reference point is the primary responsibility of the management. And this is where you can start from. And also there are certain companies where there can be additional disclosure in the form of capital to risk weighted assets ratio, tier 1 CRAR, tier 2 CRAR. So in addition to 12 financial ratios, there are certain companies where these three ratios are also be required to be disclosed. So when you use these tools, these analysis, they can give you certain visibility regarding the material uncertainty. And then you, an auditor, can use this to comment upon the same. So let's have a quick look at the audit procedure. So obviously you obtain the details of financial liabilities along with due date of payments, and you compare them with relevant agreements and contract. Then you recheck the status around the auditor's report date, because the status can change from the balance sheet date to the auditor's report date. In case of unpaid financial liabilities, check how the management plans to pay them off, especially the ones which will be payable for the period of 1 year from the balance sheet date, because the auditor is required to give specific disclosure or specific comment on this particular aspect and seek documentary evidence. In case of NBFC or housing finance, review the asset liability maturity pattern. Review the financial ratios. Now, financial ratios is a separate schedule which is given. See whenever there is 25% deviation, understand the reason from the management. You can recalculate the ratios as on date of the auditor's report to see if there's any material deviation. This will become a part of SA 560 and AS4 also. Additional documentary evidence in the form of interim financial statements, cash flow projection for 12 months, minutes of board of meetings, they can also be reviewed. If the company has given guarantees on commitments on behalf of other entities, then you need to have a brief of the financial health of those other entities also, so that if they make a default, the company's going concern is not impacted because of that. Then you obtain written representation like plan of utilization of receivables and other financial assets, documentation of board of directors, event occurring after balance sheet date in knowledge of the management which impact the paying capacity, etc. Now, the reporting language will be as this. If in the auditor's opinion, there is no material uncertainty, the company is capable of meeting its liabilities existing on the balance sheet date, as and when they fall due within the period of 1 year from the balance sheet date, matlab, there is, everything is okay. Then you give a negative assurance that according to the information and explanation given here, ratios, aging, whatever analysis that you've taken place, whatever information you've relied upon, nothing has come to our attention which causes us to believe that any material uncertainty exists as in that of audit report, so that the company will not be able to meet its liabilities as and when they fall due. So you rely upon this information. So this information can also vary depending whichever is applicable to your case. In case, second situation is no material uncertainty exists as on date of auditor's report. The company is capable of meeting its liability existing as in the balance sheet date as and when they fall due. Now, this is a case wherein there is no material uncertainty, but here there is certain disclaimer that you need to give, that we state that this is not an assurance as to the future viability of the company. I'm not projecting that the company will do wonders in the future. I'm just giving it that, okay, for 1 year it will be able to meet its liability. So I need to cover myself as an auditor. I cannot give this projection. I'm not even allowed to do it ethically. And I will also state, we further state that the reporting is based on the facts up to date of the audit report. And we neither give any guarantee nor assurance on all the liabilities falling due within the period of 1 year from the balance sheet date will get discharged by the company as and when they fall due. हम आपको guarantee नहीं दे रहे हैं, but हमें कोई material uncertainty भी नहीं है. This is how you safeguard yourself as an auditor. Hence, this language becomes very important. Lastly, based on information obtained from the management and the audit procedure performed, the material uncertainty exists. The auditor will discuss his findings and conclusion with the management. Herein, you can pick the language from SA 700 and SA 570. They have, situation-wise disclosure that you need to give either in the EOM paragraph, or you need to qualify your report when, or you need to give an adverse or disclaimer of opinion when. That situation is very, very elaborately covered under SA 700 and SA 570. So you take the language, report it in the independent auditor's report, and then use that same language to be reported under this clause under 317. I think we have already crossed the time. If there are any questions the moderator would like to take, we can take the questions for another 5-10 minutes. If I'll have time towards the end, I will cover the leftover clauses then. Over to you. If you want, I can continue with them also. I mean, your decision.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Though we had some technical glitch, but the session was very insightful, and the depth of knowledge that you have shared is very valuable. So I'll ask few questions that we have. So the first question from the participant is that if a company satisfied 50-50 criteria, but they are not registered with RBI as NBFC, then do the auditor require to issue any exception report directly to RBI?
Okay, so this is outside the scope of CARO 2020. For this, we need to refer to the applicable provisions of, Section 45IA of the RBI and the applicable provision of the Companies Act. This will, because in CARO, it just requires you to comment upon. This is a specific, subclause to, I'm getting the number, but I've already covered it here. So CARO reporting would be required. The compliances may or may not entail the auditor to report to the RBI directly. So for this, we need to check section 45IA of the RBI.
Okay, ma'am. Then my second question would be that with international businesses booming and we are seeing the Indian companies going global, so their subsidiaries are operating in very distinct and specific tax regulation zones. So as an auditor, what should be our approach to ensure that the compliance with both Indian and foreign statutory requirement? I'm asking this question from point of view of clause 7 of statutory dues. So from the point of view of Indian and foreign statutory requirements for the subsidiaries, considering there is any potential tax treatment or tax compliances that are missed, so what should be the approach as an auditor?
So this is a very good question, and again, it's a very specific, disclosure that wherein there is a foreign tax angle involved. So, like you mentioned about the DTA or tax treaty. So, if we have to look at again, now I am referring to SA 250. I will look at the legal framework which is applicable to the foreign subsidiary or the foreign holding company, and see what impact does it have, on the outflow and whether the company has made particular provisions. And for example, there is someone who has a treaty with the US and they are filing their applicable statutory forms. So I need to understand that from the management. Again, before I take up that assignment, I need to be well aware about the applicable statutes. And then I need to discuss with the management, okay, this is my knowledge. You tell me that if you are doing all this or not. You can also take help of an external, because mostly this kind of work is sometimes outsourced to an external professional who looks after the compliances. So we can have a direct meeting with them and understand the compliances that are applicable regarding to the foreign entities, because we may or may not be well aware about them. But very importantly, this becomes a part of scope of clause 7, which requires reporting and statutory dues. That is why we had mentioned other statutory dues. That's why it is, not exhaustive in nature, that whatever the list of statutory dues have been mentioned there. And then accordingly, you make a checklist to see the compliances, if they are regular or not. If they are regular, well and good. If they're not regular, you comment upon there. If there's a dispute at a particular forum, you comment upon there. Because this can actually impact the, performance of the organization. It may entail substantial outflow in the future. So it becomes very important for us to comment upon the same.
Thank you, ma'am. Over to Priyanka for any further questions that we have.
Yeah. So my first question is, in this scenario where a material misstatement caused by error is identified during the audit, yet the management is unwilling to rectify it, what would be the appropriate course of action? And should such misstatement be qualified in audit report, or would it be more suitable to highlight them as matter of emphasis?
So, okay, this is basically, it entails to SA 705 and 706.
Yeah.
We may talk about qualified and the modified opinion. Now, depending, like I had, there was a slide regarding the nature of material misstatements, where I talked about fraudulent reporting and I talked about misappropriation of asset. Now, if the financial misstatement is present and it is on account of, it is so pervasive and material in nature, Because when you talk about error may not be material or pervasive. If it is not material and pervasive, then you can just leave it in the emphasis matter paragraph, depending if you can quantify it or not. Whether you just want to, bring it to the attention of the user of financial statements in the independent audit report that, even though everything is fine, but still I think, in my opinion, as an auditor, it's important for you to understand. But if the impact is the same as material and pervasive, right, then you need to see whether it will fall under qualification or not, whether it will come under adverse or not, that QA. And if the management is not cooperating with you, because there can be further two instances that it is material and pervasive, and the management is not, budging. So in that case, you can qualify or give the adverse opinion depending upon the extent, the effect of the materiality and the pervasiveness. And whether sometimes what happens is you think you're not getting sufficient audit evidence to support your contention because the management is obstructing or management is not cooperating with you, give disclaimer of opinion. So this is all part of independent audit report. Yes, this flows has an effect on the CARO as well regarding the specific clause, but this question particularly pertains to audit report. So I hope I've answered this.
Yes, ma'am. So next question is CARO applicable to small companies as per revised definition?
So small companies excluded from the scope of CARO. I had given in the first few slides where I was talking about the scope. The small companies is not included in CARO.
Okay. So the next question is it necessary for NBFC to renew their license every year?
So there was a specific, again, this is an extension to the question that Drishti had asked. So again, registration requirement, if you look at that particular CARO clause, the clause B specifically states the auditor to comment upon the non-registration bid. So if you conclude from that part, read with obviously the rules section, the section 45IA of the RBI Act, that, okay, first of all, renewal has to take place. If renewal is not going to take place, it has been withdrawn, why it has been withdrawn, and what action has the company taken to, renew it, or why is it not taking action? Because if the company is not taking action to renew the license, or if the company's license has been withdrawn, then obviously there's something, off about it, which should awake the professional skepticism and auditor to understand it why. Because if you look around, practically there are a lot of scams that NBFCs are engaged in. So it becomes very critical for an auditor to, safeguard not only himself, but also the customers of the NBFC. Because they'll also rely upon the financial statements have been audited by you. And there is a reason why the CARO has a specific clause on NBFCs, so that they can protect the, customers and the money that has been put into NBFC, because the regulations of NBFC are not as strict as a banking company. If that is why a banking company is not covered under CARO 2020, but NBFC and HFC is covered under CARO 2020. So renewal should be mandated, but I don't know the specific requirement on this. That is section 45(1)(a). But if it is not being renewed, then you need to understand on the management, and just to safeguard yourself, that disclosure has to be made in the particular clause.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. The last question which I have is, if a company raised money through issue of compulsory convertible debentures, which is convertible at the option of investor, so on the balance sheet date, CCD is not converted, can it be shown as equity, or what disclosures are required?
So I think if it is not converted as equity, because this only happens when the investor wants it to convert, then it will obviously be shown as debenture only.
Okay.
Because the option of converting them to equity has not been exercised by the investor. So at the balance sheet, I will put it in the debenture part only, which is so this is the financial reporting aspect. If you come to the CARO part, I think this is the second subclause to the clause related to the IP and FPA where we talked about debentures. So you can use the provisions there, and if the money has been raised using CCD, so you can use the the audit procedures that have been defined to comment upon that.
Okay. So thank you, ma'am.
Any other questions? Drishti or Priyanka?
No.
So I think we've already reached 5 o'clock, so I think it doesn't make sense to pick up the deck again.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Asta ma'am, you are there?
Yes, I'm there. I'm not switching on my video because
thank you so much, ma'am, for your deliberation. And you have covered all the clauses in a short span of time, in spite of having such glitches. So thank you so much on behalf of Auditing and Assurance Standard Board of ICAI for sparing your valuable time. Thank you so much, ma'am. I also thanks towards Drishti madam and Priyanka madam for moderating this webinar. Thank you, Drishti ma'am. Thank you, Priyanka ma'am. I also thanks all the participants of today's webinar. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. And apologies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.